Welcome to our bonus episode of Steel Watching. I am your host, presenter, human being in an existential crisis, Sarah.
And I'm Eric. I don't know if I'm having an existential crisis or not, but okay, I'll join in.
Why not? Hey.
Yeah, the more the merrier.
Is it though? If it's a crisis?
Oh, I don't know. Anyway.
But either way, this is our bonus episode, and it was my brilliant idea, so I'm going to pretend I know what I'm doing.
Yes.
So essentially, we sent out requests for people to send in a list of their top 5 episodes of the season based on their own personal, opinions, things like that. And we did ours because we've just finished going through the entire season, and it's been a bit of a ride. Before we start, I'm going to ask for your top 5. Did any of them get in there that you did not expect?
Oh, you mean from other people?
No, I just mean like for you when you were compiling your list.
When I was compiling my top 5.
Yeah. Like, were there any that you kind of went, you know what? I think this is going to make the top 5 now, and I didn't think that was going to make it or whatever.
Okay, can I tell you?
Here's the existential crisis.
I didn't.
Here it is.
Can I tell you why I did not like your idea of doing a top 5? Even though I went along with it. I went along with it because
here it is, folks.
I mean,
this is the behind the scenes drama.
Yes, I am really terrible at making top 5, top 10 lists because I generally want to put more on the list than I'm allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
As one of our contributors also tried to do. We forgive her because I wanted to do the same thing. What's going to happen
if we cheat? Who's going to arrest us, right? Really?
Right.
Who's going to come after us?
But yeah, I'm really bad at slimming my choices down to the number that's prescribed. And then once I do that, I have trouble sorting them in the order that I think is correct because I'll get it in order and then the next day, an hour later, 10 minutes later, I'll look at it and say, no, this one ought to be up here and that one ought to be down here. And I'll keep doing that. Now, I'll never settle on an order. So
what you're saying is this list has gone through multiple iterations?
What I'm saying is that this list is meaningless for anything beyond the time at which I wrote it.
Fair.
So, to the question though, there are a couple of episodes that before we started doing this podcast, I probably would not have necessarily put in there on the top 5.
Yeah.
Simply because, trying to do it from memory from the last time I watched through the series, it's like the impressions you get when you're just watching it for the sake of watching it versus what you're doing for, like we're doing here with a podcast for analysis and discussion. It really changes how you look at some of these episodes. And yeah, there were episodes that I just, during the rewatches, it was like, wow, this is better than I remember.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Or in the case of Steel's Gold, it's not as bad as I remember. So
yeah, I think almost every single episode for me improved at least a little bit on my initial impressions. Mm-hmm. Even the ones that were maybe not so strong, like Steel Among the Living or You're Still the One for Me. They had moments that had I not sat down to make notes, I probably wouldn't have taken as much notice of, I guess. So
yeah, and see, that's the thing. You said that there were moments in each of these episodes.
Yeah,
and that's the thing that trips me up when I'm doing these kinds of lists is because the episode may not have been that great overall, but there was this great moment in it. How can I not acknowledge this great moment?
Yep,
so,
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. So before we do the list, then let's talk about the season as a whole.
Okay.
Maybe what our impressions were going into season 1 from just having watched it recreationally to after having sat and done an entire season's worth of a podcast. I don't know if season 1 was my super duper favorite season before, and I don't know if it is now, but I know that it's a lot stronger than I remember it being. There's a lot of really, really good character episodes and really good guest stars that they had in season 1 that I didn't really, because it was such a new show and they were still finding their feet. There were some episodes that maybe didn't come off as strong, or some moments that weren't very strong. And I know we've talked a lot about how they underused the ensemble, that they could have used a lot better. But overall, I think it's a much better season than I had originally kind of thought of it as. It's still very good. Like, as we said before, even a bad episode of the show is a good episode of television compared to a lot of things. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on the overall season?
Well, first of all, I am a big fan of Murphy. So I loved this season because Murphy was in it. I was disappointed in this season because he wasn't as well utilized as I think he could have been. And the same with Bernice, although my affection for her isn't as strong as it is for Murphy. But that's beside the point. But as far as the season goes, I think it still meets my expectations. I mean, I always thought that the first season was good and in rewatching it, I realize maybe more than I did previously how strong most of the episodes were, which is unusual for any TV show. And even, for example, Star Trek The Next Generation, their first season had a bunch of stinkers in them. And a lot of the scripts were recycled. So it's not like, okay, this is a brand new script and brand new story, so we're not sure how it's going to work out. No, they pulled and reused stories from the original series. So they had material that they had already proven was decent, but they just didn't pull it off well. And I'd put up season 1 of Remington Steele against season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation any day in terms of the script.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think we forget, because we did a Star Trek rewatch recently, and I think we forget just how unpolished and rough the first season is. They weren't sure what they were doing, but it feels to me like Michael Gleason and the rest of the writing staff and showrunners knew what they wanted to do. Maybe not how to use all of their characters most effectively. And I am maybe not as fond of Murphy as you are, but my issues with Murphy come not from...
You're fired.
Yeah, I know. But it's more that I don't like Murphy when he's pining over Laura. I like Murphy when he's pitted against Steele in a way that has nothing to do with Laura. Then I like it. I enjoy that. But the Laura stuff, I felt got really old really fast for me, and it just...
It could have been handled a lot better.
Yeah, it could have been handled, which I think we talked about as well. So I think if they had taken... And Janet DeMay, in the small amount of material she had, she could have been a really great character. She really could have. There was so much potential there. She and Steele could spar back and forth in a way that wasn't as sexually charged as he and Laura. It was just almost like siblings. And I really enjoyed seeing the little bits and pieces that we got from them, and we just did not get enough. So that makes me...
Just as you were talking there, I got thinking, and it's like, okay, wait a second. They could have really used Murphy and Bernice in a way that supported the other two, because Bernice would have given Laura a confidant to talk to about her personal feelings and her struggles with Steele. Murphy could have been kind of in the same role for Steele, although with a bit of headbutting going along with it.
Yeah.
That would have made a really interesting dynamic between the two, because it's like frenemies.
It would have been great. I would have loved to have seen an evolution where they went from enemies to friend. Something like, I don't know if you've seen Lucifer, but at the beginning of that show, Amenadiel, his brother, is his enemy. He shows up, he's ready to take him back to hell, and those two hate each other. And by the end of the show, they've got each other's backs 100%. And I would have liked to have seen some sort of evolution where it went that way, like you said. And I honestly wonder if it was one of those things where they went, well, we can't have two beautiful women on the show. One of them has to go. Right? Like, I don't know. I that's probably not it, but it kind of makes me wonder if they thought, well, why do we need two attractive? Like, to be fair though, the introduction of a secretary who's a middle-aged woman was also very groundbreaking. So I can't fault them for Mildred, and we'll get there. But
as far as the overall quality of the first season and the guidance by Gleason and staff, it's obvious that they had very strong production staff, very strong writing staff. Yeah. And I use the word staff in a more generic term because I don't think back then they had a writer's room where 5 people would sit down and work on stories the way they did now. It was more just, somebody submitted a script. Hey, it's a great story idea. Yeah, we're going to hire them to go do it. So it was a little more piecemeal in that sense.
They did have some regulars, like Lisa Latoff wrote a few. R.J. Stewart?
But what I'm saying, though, is that the writers that they were using, whether they were on the production staff directly or they were outside writers who submitted stories, they were all strong writers. They were all strong storytellers.
They seemed to know the tone they wanted too.
Exactly. Yeah. And you got to chalk that up to great guidance by the leadership of the production team, Gleason.
Yeah.
And mind blank. What's the other guy?
Robert Butler.
Butler, thank you.
Yeah.
But obviously they knew what they were going for, and they were able to keep it between the rails. I
have a really good friend who had recently started watching it, and he sent me a message and he said, "This is a really polished show." He said, "This is really, you wouldn't know." He said, "Yes, it's 80s, but it doesn't feel old." He said it's bright and it's vibrant and it feels classic, but not dated. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly the feel that I think they knew they wanted from the get-go. And they were able to do it through costuming, through set design, through just it looked expensive. And not in a way that I don't know if it was. I mean, they probably had a budget that was maybe bigger than others, and we'll see in season 2 when
it was MTM. They were a small company. They weren't a huge name, and so I can't imagine that they had the budgets that somebody like a show from Universal or Warner or somebody like that would have.
Well, they do a lot of like big locations in later seasons, as we're going to see.
They do, in later seasons, because I mean they're getting more money from the network. The show's a hit. The network is paying them more for each season. Plus, there were other considerations as well. As I recall, there was one, was it the season 3 opener? Maybe season 4, where they went over to Europe because there was something in Los Angeles happening. I think they call it the Olympics.
Yeah.
And so they didn't want to be hanging around there for that. So it would have potentially cost them more money to have stayed than to go. So they went.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. I mean, the show looked great visually.
We don't see that a lot in television anymore either, like location shooting, even in film. A lot of the time it's a green screen. You get, they green screen it or they make it look, and sometimes it's not as good. I mean, we watched 2 movies recently. We watched Ant-Man Quantumania and we watched John Wick 4. And Ant-Man green screened and CGI'd the entire thing, and it looked cheap. It looked cheap and it looked bad, and it was awful. Like, it was not good visually. John Wick 4, on the other hand, did the exact opposite. Every location was a genuine location, and they went everywhere. They went to the Middle East, they went to Paris, they went to Germany, and everything looked gorgeous, like just gorgeous. So there's something to be said for practical effects, on location shooting, all of these things that this show did, partly because that's just what you did back then. There wasn't any option to green screen it, really. Or if you did, it looked terrible. And just partly because that's the feel. That is what they wanted out of it. They wanted that sort of upscale, higher class, classic, old Hollywood feel to it. And it really, really worked.
Can we follow your rabbit trail just a little bit?
Yes,
And
sure.
can I editorialize here?
All right, let's hear it.
A lot of these film companies, studios and such, you're talking about Ant-Man.
Yeah.
They go with all this computer generated. In some cases, it makes sense because practically speaking, it would be just too difficult, if not impossible, to do something.
Yep.
But a lot of times it's laziness and cheapness.
Honestly,
they don't want to take the time and they don't want to take the money to go out and shoot on a location, build sets. And it's just so much cheaper and nobody will notice. The audience is stupid.
We notice.
Yeah. But I mean, there's this attitude that, well, the audience won't notice or they won't care. And it's a lack of respect for the audience.
It really is.
And so it's more expensive, yes, to go out and build the sets on a location or find a location and pay the crew to go out there and do that. But the look of it is so much better.
Yeah.
I remember reading, I don't remember who it was, but it was something, I think, in the production information about Star Trek The Motion Picture, if I remember correctly. May have been another one. But they were talking about the use of physical models versus computer-generated models, which is very common now in science fiction. You create a model of a spacecraft in a computer, and you generate it that way, and you film it, and it's all done. You don't have any physical construction to do because physical construction is time-consuming, it's expensive, and if you don't get it right the first time, you got to go back and take the time and the extra money to do it again. But, and I don't remember who it was. I want to say somebody like John Dykstra or somebody like that, Andy Probert or whoever, and they were talking about how when you're filming a physical model, you have the opportunity for the unexpected. You're walking around setting a camera or a light or something, and something glints off of something in an unexpected way, or you look at it from a certain angle that you hadn't thought of before, and suddenly this whole version of what you can present, how to present it, how it's going to look, the angles that you can use are totally revealed to you in a way that wouldn't have been done if you were working in a computer model. Yeah,
I agree. Now, it would be a little harder for them to shoot on location for Star Trek, but, the rest of it.
Well, okay. Simulated locations in the sense that we're substituting this location for that location.
I get it.
The Nevada desert for planet Vulcan or whatever.
Vancouver. It's always Vancouver. Let's face it. Every location ever is always Vancouver. There's me sitting and watching going, oh, there's Stanley Park.
Psych. Yeah, supposedly taking place in San Diego,
Kansas.
I believe.
Yeah.
And it's actually filmed in Vancouver, yeah. And
it's always...
they had to...
But then watching this show and seeing all the LA locations that they use, and of course I don't live in LA, but when I visited there the one time, I made it a point. I was like, I have to see the Century City Towers. I have to see this place and this place and this place. And it was really fun to go past those spots and think, oh yeah, they filmed this here, and that would have been neat. Yeah. So yeah, I just think that it's overall they knew what they were doing, and not a lot of shows get that in their first season. So it's I think it's pretty special, and it stands out that way.
Yeah. So
does that sound like a good segue?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
So should we do other submissions first, or should we do ours?
How do you want to do it? Do you want to talk about the individual submissions first and then talk about the statistical information, or do you want to talk about the statistics and then move to the
I'll let
specifics?
you handle the statistics because I think you're better with numbers and things.
Well, don't tell my bank that, but okay.
I just mean like statistics go way over my head. Yeah.
Okay, so which one do you want to do first?
Well, why don't we? I can read an email, and you could then sort of, we can kind of contextualize it after.
Okay.
We're doing just first names with this, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the first email that I've got here is from Chris, and Chris wrote, in response to the top 5 episodes in season 1 for the season 1 wrap up, we heard a lot about plot holes, questionable character representation, writing, logic, and realism. I agree with all of that. My main interest was their relationship, so my favorite 5 are based largely on the development ubiquitous of their relationship. Sorry. It's one of my favorite bits. Anyway, so number 1 for Chris is Vintage Steel. Who doesn't love this one? A glimpse into a side of Laura Holt we don't normally see. We get more of a backstory. We learn about Laura Holt's former boyfriend and see that Laura is now able to close that chapter of her life and begin a new one that includes a very clear interest in Remington Steele. Number 2. And those, I agree with all of those things about that episode. We had nothing but praise for that one.
Yes.
Number 2, Thou Shalt Not Steal. Love the premise that an old lover has reappeared and is blackmailing him into criminal behavior. Favorite scene of the first season. What do you know about this? We learn that Laura is more interested in Remington than maybe even she knows, and that Remington suggests and Laura agrees to help him steal the 5 nudes of Cairo. Love that we get to see a bit of Laura and Remington's history, her mother, and his former lover/partner in crime. Beverly Garland is hilarious as Laura Holt's mother. Totally agree. She is a gem. She's one of the biggest highlights of season 1. Cannot say enough about how much she just sort of adds to every scene she's in. And it's only 2 episodes.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, the interesting thing is that she seems to have, at least from this point on in her career, played mothers. She played the mother on Scarecrow and Mrs. King.
Lois and Clark.
Yeah. So yeah, she seems to have found her niche.
She just does it so well.
That. Yeah.
And she knows exactly what she's doing. So that was number 2 for Chris. Number 3, To Stop a Steal. I love that they're working for different clients on the same case. Like that Murphy is in on this one. We learn that our Remington is a bit more interested in Laura than he lets on when he gets upset about seeing Murphy kiss Laura. And I think we both agreed.
Swine.
Yeah, that had a really good guest star in it. So it was, I agree. It was a good one. Number 4, License to Steal. I love the overall premise of the series that a con man trying to steal the gems that she's hired to protect accidentally falls into the role. And honestly, and I'll talk about this a little later, and I'm sure you'll have stuff to say, but it's probably one of the strongest pilots, if not the strongest pilot for a show. Or premiere, sorry.
I was going to say.
It's a habit. It's a habit. And number 5, Steel Waters Run Deep. Hilarious. I was abducted by a gang of Latin youths. I love that Remington won't do what he promises to do, meet with Emery Arnock so that he can pursue a case. Yay, first kiss. Which we said is plausible deniability.
Yeah. I think, Chris, I think you know that I'm going to disagree with you on that, but that's okay. We can agree to disagree. Talking about the first season overall and the strength of the scripts and your misidentification of License to Steal as the pilot just popped something into my head. Combining those 2 things. It could be that the reason this premiere episode, License to Steal, was so strong was because it wasn't the pilot.
True.
They did a pilot. They sold the series based on the pilot. And then the network said, we want to see the beginning. And it could have gone bad. That type of a situation, you could wind up with a really, really stinker of a script. But I think they had enough experience at that point between the scripts that they had already prepared and the one that they had shot that they were able to take all that and put it into this premiere episode and make it a stronger one than it might have been otherwise if it had been the pilot. I
agree. And I think it gets right what Firefly got wrong. And don't get me wrong, I love Firefly. But if anyone who's seen Firefly knows, that show got canceled because the network did not know how to handle it. And essentially, they shot a 2-hour pilot for Firefly. And the network said, oh no, this is too complicated and too long and too boring. Give us something exciting and action-packed. And so they shot the second episode, and that served as the pilot. And then they showed a bunch of the episodes out of order. So the fans were really confused about what the show was doing and where it was going and who these characters were, because we didn't get that 2-hour, and it was a really good pilot, and it didn't actually get aired until the show got canceled. And then they aired it, and it was like, man, the network didn't know what they were doing, because that was 2 hours of, it was cinematic, and it was a really good idea, and gave us all this depth and backstory, and that's what they did with the premiere episode for this. They gave us that the network actually understood, we need to see this. We need to know how they got to this point, because otherwise the viewers will be confused, like we were with Firefly, going, I like it, but I don't really get it, you know? So
well, again, back to the comments about not respecting the audience.
Yeah.
I had no problem following the premiere episode, the pilot episode of Firefly, the 2 hours.
No, me either. Episode. It was great.
I mean, it was totally coherent.
Yeah.
And to suggest that the audience just wouldn't understand it
is, again,
it's just a matter of a disrespect toward the audience's intelligence. It's the same thing that Gene Roddenberry said that he was fighting back in 1966 with Star Trek.
Yeah.
Is because nobody wanted to give the audience the respect that they were due. They wanted the TV shows just dumbed down. Monster of the Week.
And this show did not do that. It didn't dumb things down. And I really appreciate that. So thank you, Chris, because that's a really good top 5 list. Top 5 list. I can talk. Shall we go to next we have Karen, who gave us number 5, Thou Shalt Not Steal. So Karen wrote, Abigail and Felicia, these two pack the episode full of downright hilarious scenes, insight into Laura's background, and Steele's. Steele proves his worth, that Laura can trust him. Really good character episode, I agree. Then we've got Hearts, Drunken Laura, and Steele. Steele's drunken admission of endearment towards Laura. I do love this. I do love being a peppler.
Yes.
Decent mystery, though generally I don't care. It's more about the relationship and comedy for me. Then number 3, Karen's got to stop a steal. I love Maury. I'm here to see Mr. Metal and Happy because he's lovable. He's a lovable dopey mutt, actually a basset hound. Steele and Laura work opposite ends of the same case. Steele proving his worth. Steele is in his element. Do you know anything about theft? Professional theft? Really funny inside joke. Murphy declares his feelings for Laura, but she picks Steele. All of those things. Love that. I especially love the fact that Happy is right on the nose. And this is me editorializing now, because I have on our floor, one of the people that lives on our floor has a basset hound, and 100% that's what they're like. He's a killer. Don't take one step more. You're useless. Yeah, that's basically basset hounds.
You know, Maury was a fantastic character, but I think Happy was right up there with him.
Happy stole the show for sure.
Yes. He never overplayed his scenes.
No. He didn't mug for the camera, you know. It was very
very
so then we've
subtle acting.
Then we've got Vintage, undeniably the best, downright hilarious, great mystery, great romance, insight into Laura, her psyche due to love lost, explains some of her motivation moving forward with her relationship with Steele. Then Sting of Steel, Abigail and Daniel. Abigail once again makes us laugh out loud. Poor Laura. Daniel is an element of Steele's past, father figure. We get quite a bit of information. Love the dance scene. Great sting operation. Oh, and Johnny Todd. And I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Karen snuck an extra episode. It's fine. We'll allow it. Steele in circulation.
Well, she acknowledges that I got out the baseball bat and was banging her over the head with it. Keep reading.
Okay, this was on my list of 5-star episodes. You made me remove one.
You didn't say the name of it. Go back and do it again.
Steele in circulation. I apologize. Steele in circulation. This was on my list of 5-star episodes. You made me remove one. I only knocked this off because of Pierce Brosnan's scene where they find Alfred in the valley believing he's dead. It was a little overdone and it took me out of the moment. That said, this episode proves that Steele and Laura are well matched, in my opinion. His experience as a con man being an asset in the PI game, her improv skills proving her to be a great con. You can see why Steele is intrigued by her. I'm thinking specifically about the scene they talk their way into the gun shop. Steele also shows his chops devising a plan to break into the bank. Agreed. All of those are 100%. I agree. And it's interesting because some of those might not make my top 5, and obviously we're going to get to ours, but it's what you said about the moments, right? Because
yes, exactly.
Yeah. That list highlighted some of those moments where I'm going, oh God, did I get my list right? Should I change it?
Yeah.
Crap.
So basically your list is pointless and meaningless as well, is what you're saying.
Maybe. Probably. Yeah. Do you want to hear the next one?
Yeah. Let's
All
I
right.
mean, we've already done some. Let's finish them all. I mean,
let's do it.
Why stop in the middle?
So we've got Jennifer, who said, hi, Eric and Sarah. I promised myself that I wouldn't procrastinate about getting my list to you, but sometimes events just seem to conspire against me. Hopefully my email isn't too late to be useful, so here's my top 5 in no particular order. Number 1, vintage steel. I'm seeing a pattern here. Are you seeing a pattern here? This episode...
No? I don't see a pattern.
This episode would earn a spot on this list solely for the inclusion of that wonderfully awful, or is it awfully wonderful, Abbott of Costello joke. Agreed. But there's so much more to love about this episode. One would be hard-pressed to find the funnier moment than the scene in the bottling section of the winery, which, if you don't recall, is the place where the wine is put into bottles. Laura and Steele struggling to stuff Harry into the barrel. Wilson being the worst lip reader ever, Lentil,
yes.
And Laura swatting Steele's hand off her shoulder before anyone notices that she suddenly got 2 left arms around her. Just brilliant. You get a bit of everything. Comedy, as I've already mentioned, romance, that kiss in the wine cellar, drama. A nice example is Wilson and Laura's conversation in the shed about why he left her. There's an especially lovely bit of acting from Zimbalist and Brosnan at the point when she realizes he's overheard some of the conversation. Just overall a very enjoyable episode.
Yep.
And I think you and I discussed what that moment meant because we both read something very different into it, which in my opinion is the mark of really good acting, because as long as it's not too inscrutable that it makes no sense, there's right. something there that's really potent, I think.
Yes.
So then we've got Thou Shalt Not Steal. It's always fun seeing Steele put the skills he acquired in his previous profession to use. The museum break-in scene is one of my favorites. We're out of Laura's comfort zone and into Steele's during that time. Add that to our first meeting with Laura's mother, and the first time Cassandra Harris has a role in the show. It's interesting when we get more info about Steele or Laura's history. True. Number 3, Sting of Steel. Any episode that is an homage to the Sting gets bonus points from me. More importantly, we get our first episode with Daniel Chalmers. Abigail returns with a bang. The Johnny Todd persona is a fun change of pace for our intrepid Mr. Steele. Agreed.
That's a bad joke. Returns with a bang.
Yeah.
Bang, bang, you're dead.
Yep.
Love it.
You gave my mother live ammunition? I'm not the ones aimed at Daniel. Let's see. Number 4 in the Steal of the Night. As a fan of Agatha Christie, this episode was a fun one. A murder in a country home where one of the attendees must be the killer. A reminder why it's usually more fun anticipating a class reunion than actually attending it. True. I really hope someone wore a pedometer to keep track of all that running up and down those steps. Yeah, it's true. Number 5, Steele in Circulation. Another episode where Steele's B&E skills come in handy. Sorry, I had to make a reference to the usual phone in the Broken Promises clothing store. There's some first-rate acting, especially from Brosnan, as Steele frantically attempts to keep sweet, naive Alfred alive. The scene at the gun shop always cracks me up. Sis and I could have given him the vibrating foot bath with the built-in clock radio like we planned, but no. Terrific line delivery by Zimbalist about something that is surely the most over-the-top, yet it could be legit from the 80s gift ever. Would love to read reviews about that item. Bought this as a gift for my cousin Cindy. She loved being able to do an at-home pedicure while listening to the latest top 40 hits. Used it right up until she died under mysterious circumstances. Something to do with electrocution. I agree. And actually, I would buy that. So, yeah.
What, you'd buy the vibrating foot bath with the built-in clock radio, or you'd buy that somebody got electrocuted using it? Or both?
Definitely both. 100% both. The little scene in the shredded currency bin is an important one. I think in that Steele and Laura are able to be honest about their feelings. Nothing like a near-death experience to encourage open dialogue. Also, Sherry is awesome, and I hope she went to Denver with Murphy. I have headcanoned that in my brain. She went to Denver and they lived happily ever after. And that's what happened to Murphy.
I think there's a lot of fan fiction that would disagree with you. But
Probably.
Anyway.
So yeah, that's Jennifer's contribution. And then we've got Mahoney, I think you said it was, wrote, "Loved your podcast. I have just recently discovered that there are more than one season of RS. I explained that bit on Facebook. After watching and rewatching all 5 seasons back and forth several times in just the past few months, I think season 1 is still my favorite season, which makes narrowing down my top 5 a rather challenging task. Anyway, for what it's worth, here are my top 5 episodes of season 1. We've got License to Steal. I've come across many RS top 10 lists and hardly ever saw this episode on those lists. For me, however, this is an episode that I keep going back to. It's a very clever way to introduce a rather out-of-the-box premise of a detective show, as well as the personalities of all the main characters. The plot, while not perfect, has twists and turns that keep me guessing. The best part for me, however, is the introduction of old movies and quotes in the show. 5 passports bearing the names of Humphrey Bogart's characters. I was sold right there. And the timing and delivery of that tea and sympathy quote, flawless. See, I loved watching black and white Hollywood films as a kid, which is rather uncommon in China in the 80s. So when I first watched Remington Steele at the age of 12 or 13, I felt like I had finally met a friend, if you know what I mean. And
you know,
just talked about that.
Yeah, his comment about it not commonly making the top 5 or top 10 lists that people have. I think one of the reasons, and this just came to me as you were reading his comments, is that License to Steal, even though it is still very much consistent with the rest of the series, has a slightly different tone. It's a little more serious. It's a little less comedy. There's still plenty of comedy in there, but the tone of it is a little more serious. And again, it's the kind of the prequel to the rest of the series in that he's not Remington Steele yet. So
no.
I think there's a lot of reasons why people don't include it. And I'm not going to disagree with those reasons, but I think he's right. I think it's a shame that it doesn't get onto more top 5 lists. And
I agree.
Let's not talk about my list.
Oh, we'll get there. So then Still Waters Run Deep, clever and funny. I love the actor who played Arnok. Me too. A Good Night's Steal. The mystery was well written. Paul Reiser was so much fun. There are many funny lines. My favorite is perhaps the line about the union. Yeah, that's that's one of my favorite lines too. You're slipping if the union could see you now.
Yeah.
And then To Stop a Steal, many comedic moments. Maury Singer is perfection. Also an episode with great music. John Roby, LOL. And Vintage Steele. I know this is probably a favorite of every Remington Steele fan. I have to admit that when I watched it as a teen, this wasn't a standout episode for me. However, at that time, I had not watched The Trouble with Harry yet, and I think some of the subtle jokes might have gotten lost in translation. Now I can truly appreciate the appeal. I still think the final reveal was a bit stretched, but otherwise it is indeed a great episode. There are so many other episodes of this season that I love. It's not an easy task. So, totally agree.
That's exactly what I was talking about earlier.
And then the last one that I've got here is Mel, who also cheated.
Yes.
Said, okay, there are 6, not 5. Each episode showcases the writing team's ability to create intricate plots while providing insight into the main characters' pasts. Each episode sets up how Laura Holton, Remington's professional and personal relationship will develop in subsequent series, as well as introducing essential recurring characters. Running, jumping, and humor are key components, while Stephanie Zimbalist and Pierce Brosnan are given equal time to showcase their talents, physical comedy, athleticism, and acting abilities, not to mention screen chemistry.
Can I just interrupt real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
I just looked and I saw that Mel is not where I expected her to be, because she was talking about her verbiage here about subsequent series.
It sounds British.
In the British terminology. Agreed. Because in Britain, with British TV, Australia, and New Zealand, that sort of thing, they call them Series 1, Series 2, Series 3, not Season 1, 2, 3. So it's interesting that she uses that terminology, or I suppose Mel could be a guy. Mel uses that terminology, even though, based on what I see here in the email, Mel is not from Britain. Perhaps a transplant. But I appreciate the terminology
My
and the choice
husband
of
is a
words.
transplant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so while Butler and Gleason are always credited as creators, look at who the lead writers are when it isn't Butler and Gleason. Zlotov, Cannon, Baskin, and Knott. Later seasons 3 and 4
sounds
added
like a
writers.
law firm.
It does. It really does. Like Crinkle and Scowl.
Yes.
Later seasons 3 and 4 added writers Brianna Lane, formerly Brian Allen Lane, Jeff Melvoin, and Robin Bernheim, who kept the standards high for action, humor, and a bit of romance that made RS a classic screwball comedy. Let's don't talk about season 5, although the riff on The Quiet Man was fun. Oh, we're going to have to talk about season 5 eventually.
Well, we're
right?
going to get there eventually, yeah. Sorry, Mel.
Yeah. So then we've got the episodes. Still Waters Run Deep. Laura and Remington are hired by 3 video game creators to find their missing partner, who has apparently disappeared with a large portion of the company's assets and their newest video game. A potential client, Emery Arnock, a grocery store chain owner, tags along providing light comedy. Laura Holt and RS first kiss. Do they though? Writers Robert Butler, Michael Gleason, and Lee Zlotov. Then we've got Signed, Sealed, and Delivered. A mild-mannered information retrieval agent who is about to be married asks the help of the Remington Steele Agency when it appears that the CIA is attempting to kill him. Remington confesses that he envies the simple life, and Laura again shows off her athletic abilities. Writers Robert Butler, Michael Gleason, and Glenn Gordon Cannon. Is it Karen or Cannon?
Karen. Yeah.
Okay. Thou shalt not steal. Ms. Holt and Mr. Steele disagree on whether to provide security for a cursed painting. Miss Holt's interfering mother comes for an annoying visit and is charmed by Steele. Cassie appears for the first time as Felicia, and Beverly Garland as Laura's mother, who wished Laura was a dental assistant. Writers Robert Butler, Michael Gleason, and Lee Zlotov. And Steele Belted, which is an interesting... I don't think I've ever seen Steele Belted make a list. So
that one was a surprise to me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to challenge it. I think it's a good choice, but yeah, it's not one that I would have picked, and it's not one that I think commonly comes up. But
yeah,
I am absolutely not going to disparage the choice because it's a good episode.
Absolutely not. Yeah, it is a good episode. Mr. Steele is suspicious of an attorney who he thinks is paying more attention to Ms. Holt. Remington Steele never shows up wrinkled. Steele talks of his Brixton past. Murphy declares himself to Laura. Laura dates Creighton Phillips / Remington Steele dates Miss Taplinger. Never makes business with pleasure. Well, it's not a hard and fast rule. Your name isn't Remington Steele, and a mere technicality. Some quotes from the episode. Murphy and Steele partner to prove Phillips is the murderer and prevent Laura from succumbing to Phillips' seduction. Writers Robert Butler and Michael Gleason. So, yeah, it's a good one. It definitely has some really good moments in it.
Yep. As we were talking earlier, it's the moments that make the episode memorable to you. So, yeah.
Agreed. Yep. Vintage Steele, Laura is reunited with a former lover when he seeks the help of Remington Steele investigations after finding a corpse in a vat of wine. The investigation eventually leads to a nearby monastery where Steele and Laura learn the identity of the corpse as well as the identity of the killer. And we've got some quotes here. Icy Calm said to the monk, when we learn of Laura's wild past in Acapulco and the need for Remington to keep her exuberant behavior under control. A real showcase for Stephanie Zimbalist's athleticism and Pierce Brosnan's comedic timing. Absolutely. Writers Robert Butler, Michael Gleason, Susan Baskin.
We've talked about it before. We've talked about it before, how Brosnan should be doing more comedy.
Oh, yeah. And absolutely.
And I love the movies that he does that are humorous, such as Laws of Attraction. It's got a lot of humor in it, but it's not a straight out comedy, which he does so well.
He really, really does. And then the last one, which is technically 6, but we'll allow it. Sting of Steel. A murderous casino owner hires the agency to locate a con artist, Daniel Chalmers, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., a man from Mr. Steele's past who swindled his operation. Ms. Holt's annoying mother, Abigail, is back. Laura questions Chalmers and Steele's past, and we learn 5 aliases for Chalmers, key background information for subsequent episodes and character development. Harry is just one of a bag full of names that Steele has used. Johnny Todd makes his first appearance, trust issues, both professional and personal again. even Murphy has a star turn as a sexist Remington Steele, which is probably one of my favorite James Reed performances. And writers Robert Butler, Michael Gleason, and Gary Knott. So yeah, this is a good list as well.
I wonder the fact that Daniel had 5 passports, and in the premiere episode, Steele had 5 passports. I wonder if that was just a coincidence, or if somebody did that for the purposes of, balance.
Maybe. I would think so, because it would help us to connect the two.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you contextualize this, and I can't even say statistics, much less figure them out. So I'm going to let you do it.
Statistics.
Yeah.
Well, what I did was I listed all the episode choices that we received, and I took them in the order that they gave them. So, for example, I think it was Chris said,
okay,
well, these are my choices, but not necessarily in this order. I'm going to go with the theory that order does reflect kind of their thinking, even though they don't necessarily say it. Yes, subconscious. So, Vintage Steel, chosen 5 times, twice as number 1, once as number 4, and twice as number 5.
Okay.
Thou Shalt Not Steal was picked 4 times, once as a number 1, twice as a number 2, and once as a number 3. Still Waters Run Deep 3 times, once as number 1, once as number 2, once as number 5.
Huh.
To Stop a Steal came up 3 times, twice as number 3, once as number 4. And Staying a Steal 3 times, chosen as number 3 and once as number 5. License to Steal, picked twice, once as number 1, once as number 4. Steal in Circulation, also 2 times, once as number 5, once as number 6. Signed, Sealed, and Delivered, 1 time as number 2. Hearts of Steel, 1 time as number 2. Goodnight Steel, once as number 3. Steel Belted, once as number 4. And In the Steel of the Night, 1 time as number 4. So,
interesting.
What I also did was I went through and I assigned a score value to them. So, for example, when an episode was picked as the number 1 choice, I gave it a value of 5.
Right.
If it came up as number 2,
makes sense.
Gave it 4, 3, and so on.
4, 3, yeah.
And then I added those up. So I got what I think is kind of a final ranking based on that score. All totally scientific, meaning absolutely nothing. Anyway.
Yeah, completely.
Vintage Steel.
You did math, guys. Math.
Vintage Steel was picked 5 times, but it was not the highest valued score. Thou Shalt Not Steal came in with a final score of 16.
Okay.
Vintage Steel came in second with a final score of 14. Still Waters Run Deep, final score of 10. To Stop a Steal, 8. License to Steal, 7. Sting of Steel, 4. Hearts of Steel, also a 4, but I put them in that order, Sting and then Hearts, because Sting was picked 3 times, Hearts 1 time, even
Hearts
though their
only.
score value was the same. Signed, Sealed, and Delivered was next with a final score of 4. Goodnight Steel, final score of 3. Steel Belted and In the Steel of the Night both had a final score of 2, and both were chosen 1 time. And then Steel in Circulation, final score of 1. So, based on the frequency that they were picked and the position that they were put in, that's the order.
Now, are you going to change the order once you hear my top 5? And I'm assuming you've added yours in there.
No,
or
I did not.
Sticking with just this is.
I did not add mine in there because I didn't have yours, and I wasn't going to ask for yours before this.
That makes sense. Okay.
So.
The big reveal.
Yeah. So that's just based on the feedback from the listeners. So.
Okay. Cool.
So anyway, all right.
So. I think what we should do for ours then is we take turns. You give me your 5th, your top 5, or your number 5. I can't even brain. And I'll do my number 5 and then down the list.
Okay, are we starting with our number 5 choice, or are we starting with our number 1 choice?
I think so.
Okay,
I think we should start
bottom
with
of the
number
list
5 and
then.
work our way bottom and up.
So you're twisting it around. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we'll do honorable mentions at the end.
You had honorable mentions too. Okay, it's not just me.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
My
thought I was going to get in trouble for cheating.
No. Honorable mentions are fine. It's just when you try and sneak them in there as part of the number 5, this is number 5, and this was also number 5, and that one's also number 5. No. So, okay, my number 5.
Yeah, agreed.
Steel Crazy After All These Years.
Okay.
This, along with You're Still the One for Me, which I didn't rank, but those 2 episodes are arguably Murphy at his finest. Although in reading about this, I am reminded that it was a good one with Steel Belted. He did have a good performance on that one too. But yeah, I like Steel Crazy After All These Years because it is a Murphy-centric episode in large part. And it's really, as we discussed when we were doing that episode, it's really a very clever construction wherein the murderer is almost not in the show at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a great episode.
It is. Yeah, totally agree with you. It's got that. It survives on the strength as well of the guest stars too, because you've got some really, really strong guest stars that all make their presence felt in an episode that could feel crammed but doesn't. So
and even though all the guest characters, I'll use the term guest characters, are all crazy and kind of not necessarily totally in touch with reality, they're all totally different and distinct.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
They're all different kinds of crazy.
Yeah. I agree that it's a really solid episode. And number 5, I'm going to say number 5 was the hardest episode for me to figure out. I was able to do my first 4 fairly, maybe not easily, but I had a good idea of what was going to make it.
Well, see, I cheated.
And number 5.
I cheated because my number 5, 4, 3, and 2 are not necessarily in that the order that I'm going to be giving them to you.
Okay, fair enough.
So, again, plausible deniability.
It's better to ask forgiveness and permission.
Yes.
Yeah. I had a really hard time finding my number 5 because some of the ones that were submitted were contenders for me because I really, really liked To Stop a Steal. That was definitely up there for me. And I almost picked it, and I almost picked a bunch of other ones that made my honorable mentions. But I think for this one, I went with A Good Night's Steal.
Okay.
There are, because while I knew that certain episodes would make my list, like I said, the others were a bit of a toss-up. There's elements and moments to many episodes that are just really, really good. But it wasn't until this podcast that I realized what an exceptionally strong episode this was. It had a really, really good performance from Paul Reiser, who basically took the comedy up a notch to an 11. And again, for a guest star, they've had some pretty strong guest stars, but I read somewhere that they had to keep doing takes over and over again because Pierce Brosnan was laughing so hard every time Paul Reiser opened his mouth that they were having difficulty filming. And I think that that's the mark of a really strong guest star. It had a really good script from the beginning. It was all duck puns and the dialogue and the sleep clinic. This one just kind of, it really stood out. And another thing that I think helped it earn its place was the score, and the direction, like especially with the more suspenseful scenes, the performances with Pierce and Stephanie, how terrible she is at undercover, how awful that whole hospital is, how really, really unethical they are. The whole thing was just, and it was also a really fun episode to record our podcast for. So I don't know if that's what tipped the scales, but that one made my number 5.
All right. Fair enough.
So yeah.
I will mention that A Good Night's Steal was on my honorable mentions list. So
there we go. All right. What's your number 4?
My number 4 is, and again, my 5, 4, 3, 2 are not necessarily in the order that I would rank them on because they are so close that I could interchange them at a moment's notice. Steel in the News.
Fair enough.
I mean, a divergently zany cast, a genuinely zany cast of characters, and yet a heart-wrenching finale that I even had trouble discussing without choking up. So
it was really good.
It's
really strong.
Oh, and can I say, you remember my theory about this fine. I'm going to say it anyway. My theory about how the Don Henley song Dirty Laundry may have been either an inspiration or influenced this, I was absolutely 100% wrong. We did have an email that we exchanged with.
We had confirmation.
With the writer of this episode, or one of the writers, and he said no, wasn't the case at all. He said, if anything, that closing speech given in the episode was more reminiscent of the TV or the movie Network. He didn't say that had inspired it, but that if there was a similarity, if there was anything that was more reminiscent of some other show, some other movie, or some other source, it would have probably been more paralleled to the movie Network. So, yeah.
Makes sense.
So
for my number 4, I had Sting of Steel, which Abigail episode number 2, couldn't resist. This one also involving another anything that involves an old friend of Steel showing up is usually good. In this case, we get the first Daniel Chalmers episode and Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., whose chemistry with both actors is fantastic. It's funny that we only see, as I've said before, Abigail twice in this entire series, but somehow through these 2 performances, she makes her presence felt throughout the entire series. And it's just so funny to watch her after being jilted on a romantic weekend, appearing in the offices just as Laura is hired to find Chalmers by the man who was swindled out of some money from Chalmers, and how she just kind of gets unwillingly pulled into Steele and Chalmers' cat and mouse game against Hoskins, how her hard-fought trust in Steele is threatened, the chemistry, as I said, between Stephanie and her father when they act together, as well as Pierce Brosnan and Zimbalist Jr., all of that. And it's a great heist episode. I love a heist. Sting. This is a sting, not a heist. But even still, it's just a really good, all the moving parts fit together in a way that just stands out in a really fun way. And I said it before, and I'll say it again, this should have been the finale. It would have been a really great finale for the season. Not that Circulation isn't. It's a great episode. It just didn't feel like a finale in the same way, I think.
No, I agree. And curiously, Sting of Steel is my number 3. I mean, Daniel, Abigail, Murphy doing a send-up of Remington Steele, Laura as the shady Seamus. I mean, how could it possibly be any better? Great episode.
It's so good. Yeah. It's so good.
So that was my number 3. Yes.
And my number 3 was Thou Shalt Not Steal, which also involves Abigail. So, I mean, this was our first exposure to Abigail, who is absolutely hilarious. Her passive-aggressive comments, snarky attitude, make her a perfect foil for Laura. It's great. Throw in the meeting between Laura and Felicia, and a museum heist involving little green monsters, and this episode is, in my opinion, really an early indication of what the show was capable of. Abigail's involvement really gives us some brilliant comedy as well as some insight into the dynamic between Laura and her mother, as well as her own sort of desires and ambitions. We see that Laura is not really interested in finding a man necessarily to marry or settle down, though we get the impression she's not opposed to it. It's a clash of generations and ways of thinking, which is really interesting. And she already has very little reason to trust Steele, so the arrival of Felicia and the way she maneuvers her way into Steele's apartment makes for some really good tension. I love the did you have something slightly wicked in mind?
No, I love the combative headbutting and the one-upmanship and the not really cat fight attitude, but this conflict between Laura and Felicia, and the little catty remarks like, "Oh, it's so nice that you bring your mother into the job and let her work with you. I could never do that." Do it. Yeah, it's just like cut.
It's so good. It is so good. The tension is fantastic, and then of course she agrees to steal the painting with him.
Yeah,
and so we get this awesome heist scene with some really again. I think one of the other submissions said that we get to see Steele in his element and Laura sort of
out of hers. Outside
of hers, which is good, and just really great performances. and charisma of all of the characters. So yeah, that one's my number 3.
Number 2 for me, Signed, Sealed, and Delivered. Overall, it's a good episode. And overall, I would say it's probably not up to the level of the other ones that I've chosen for my 5. But Tom Bray's performance throughout the entire script, but especially
100%.
But especially that scene in the apartment or in Laura's house where he's describing seeing his friend blown up and the just the fantastic acting. I mean, you believe it. You believe that this guy actually saw this, that he's not acting it. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's heartrending. It's really good, and it's not over the top or
it could have been
Stella,
it could have been so badly handled, and he just nailed it.
He really did. He really did. And that one's in my honorable mentions for that moment alone. Just that moment being so strong and so early in the show too. Again, it was one of those things. I think it was like what, episode 3? Mm-hmm. 4? It's not very far in.
And from an actor who did not, and even still now, I guess, does not, or certainly at this time, did not have a huge resume behind him. It just, I mean, he'd done some other work, but he hadn't been doing it for decades. He was still a fairly young actor at the time.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I agree. My number 2, Vintage Steel. Which is a fan favorite for a reason, right? And she only wrote a few episodes, but Susan Baskin, this one is one of the most perfect blends of comedy and character development. We get Wilson Jeffries, who gives us a glimpse into Laura's backstory, and we know that because she's hesitant to jump into something with Steele because she's worried about getting hurt, we don't truly understand the depth of her hurt, until Wilson shows up. And she does such an incredible job of doing the impossible, which is giving us an ex-boyfriend who did something that was incredibly hurtful and impacted Laura greatly, but who the audience also likes, and who seems like a genuinely good person despite things not working out between them. And she gives us this storyline in which Laura gets to have what many people only ever dream of having, which is closure with a relationship that didn't end well. Steele gets to see into her past and understand where she's coming from, and the two of them can grow closer. And then we get this entirely different version of Laura, a woman who, when she was with Wilson, was uninhibited, free, and who learned to hide that part of herself after Wilson left. And that's just the character story, because then you've got the hilarious plot revolving around a body that they affectionately dub Harry, who keeps popping up in different places, gives us possibly the most brilliant physical comedy we've seen in the show to date. The Abbott of Costello pun. Their performances.
Throughout this entire episode, there are layers of puns and jokes that just come at you from all these different directions, and it's like it's suddenly dropped on you from 50 feet up, and it's like, I saw that one coming. How could I have not seen that one coming?
And just and their performances, right? You got so much physical comedy, the moments of vulnerability. They feel earned. They don't feel cheaply thrown in there to elicit sentimentality. They feel right and they feel purposeful. And it's so funny and it's so silly and it's so zany, but it's also just so good. And just, that whole episode is,
And like we talked about,
number 2.
And like we talked about at the time, she picked up a tiny thread from a previous episode.
Yep.
My number 2 is, as a matter of fact, the Signed, Sealed, and Delivered, and the reference to the white belts and such as that. And she picked up this thread from that episode and used it to create this whole new episode. It's just, this woman has some great writing skills. That's all you can say, is that she has got some great writing skills and some great instincts for writing. And Vintage Steel was my number 1. And I will admit that part of the reason for that being my number 1 choice is a sentimental choice. It's the one that I remember from way back. It was the one that stuck in my mind more than any other episode, and that was the one that I was so bound and determined to get on the videotape series when they were so hard to come by. So it's a sentimental favorite, but I think even discounting that, it's still gonna have to be my number one regardless, because it's such a great episode.
Yeah. You can't really argue with that choice, honestly.
But you're going to, because that wasn't your number one, was it?
No, it wasn't. But my number one did appear on your list just further down. My number one is Steel in the News. I knew I had always loved this episode, but it wasn't until doing the podcast that I realized just how much this episode had to offer for both character development as well as making an actual statement on something. Generally, the show sort of shies away from any kind of commentary, but it gets awfully close here. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of the few episodes where the A plot is just as important as the B plot for me. Usually when I like an episode, it's because it has something that furthers the character development or interpersonal relationship between Steel and Laura. And this episode had a lot of character development, but it also had this deeply moving A plot and a villain that we genuinely sympathize with. And J.D. Cannon, I cannot say enough about, who is an incredible character actor. His performance is one of the most moving and nuanced performances that I have ever seen a guest character give on the show, if not the most. It had a large assortment of suspects and storylines to balance, and yet it did it in a way that seamlessly weaved the interpersonal issues of the Spotlight News team together with everything else. And we get like these smaller subplots that help further Laura's character growth, as well as Steele's, like her connection to Elliot, her hero worship. It's beautiful. Seeing her be vulnerable is hard, and watching her learn that heroes can fail is even harder. And she gives such an incredible performance that I think it's worth it. Like, it gives us a glimpse into the sorts of stories I wish they had told more of with Laura. We see her go on this journey of like wanting to believe in Elliot and then being utterly devastated when she realizes that he's responsible for the murders. And we see him take responsibility for them and give that confession that is humbling and powerful. And for a killer, he has a lot to say on the way that we consume media and how we continue to do so. Right? His words are actually still really relevant, despite the fact that 40 years have passed, and the lesson of not confusing the news with the people delivering it, I think even now is even more relevant. This is also the first episode where we get a glimpse of Steele's backstory in more detail. We get his connection with Amy Fogelson, which is one of the rare moments in season 1 where he drops his drama queen act and allows himself to reveal his backstory to someone in order to protect the agency and find the killer. He develops this trust bond with her, and overall, the episode is hard and it's messy, and Laura gets hurt at the end, and it might not have been half as good had it not been for the incredible performances. So yeah, that is my number one.
Yeah, and yeah, I can't argue with it. It's a great episode. It's just a matter of, like I said, on any given day.
Yeah, true. So what are your honorable mentions then?
Well, I balanced my top 5 with 5 honorable mentions. Okay. License to Steal, Stealing the Show, Goodnight Steel, Hearts of Steel, and In the Steel of the Night.
Oh, okay. I have 5 as well, ironically. Are we in the same brain? Like, this is creepy. Yeah, because and again, these were all episodes that kept weaving in and out of my 5th slot, right? Because I kept piecing them out. Oh, I'll put that in, take that out, put that out. Yeah.
Been there, done that.
My 5 honorable mentions were Stealing the Show, License to Steal, Signed, Sealed, and Delivered, To Stop a Steal, and Steal Crazy After All These Years.
I think we basically picked all the same 10 episodes.
We did.
It's just we had them in a different order. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, which is not surprising, though, considering our conversations on them.
Yeah, but your choices and my choices, the 10 that we picked as the 5 plus the honorable mentions, plus the choices of our listeners who submitted theirs, I think it shows 2 things. First of all, there were several standout episodes that everybody agreed were standouts, but at the same time, there was enough variety in the choices to show that it wasn't like, we had this one great episode, and then a bunch of mediocre or average episodes. There were a lot of strong episodes, and it was just a matter of these were the strongest of the strong.
Yeah, it was good variety. It could have easily have just been, as you said, the same monotonous list.
It shows the strength of season one. It really does.
It really does. Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong because you've got the statistics, but I think you and I are the only ones who had Steel in the News on our lists. I don't think anybody else picked that one.
Yeah, I don't think so either. No, it was just you and I.
So I mean, that just...
And
that's interesting.
My choosing that was really highly influenced by the fact that we looked at that episode in such detail, and it made me reevaluate it because
same.
My recollection of it was it's just a zany news station show, crazy characters and such. But so much there.
I think for me it was still it made a bit more of an impact even before we recorded it because I remembered it being one of the few episodes you see Laura cry.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And which is interesting because a show with a male and female that have chemistry, etc., they usually don't shy away from having your main female character cry. And I think she only does twice. I can't think of maybe 3 if we count. Yeah. It's very rare because she's such a strong character and she keeps so much of it so private that when she's standing there watching Elliot give his speech, you just get like her heart's on the table and it's just a really beautiful scene. So I remembered really liking that scene and really liking the episode. And then when we talked about it, I was like, oh yeah, this is really good. It was really good.
Well, they established her character strongly enough that it wasn't in her character to just cry. And they didn't write scenes to give her poor excuses to cry, phony excuses to cry.
Yeah.
When they did it, it was in context of the character. It was respectful of the character that they had created. It was circumstances that were severe enough that you could accept it from her character. So, yeah.
Which I think is, if you think about it, that's realistic. People don't cry at the drop of a hat. Granted, they don't have maybe as dramatic lives as some of these characters do that we watch. But if you watch some of these soap operas and every other second there's a tear streaming down. One perfectly placed tear that usually appears in the middle of the eye and just kind of gently trickles down and it never messes up their mascara and they look beautiful doing it. And I don't know about you, but if I cry, my face is all red, it's blotchy, there's some snot usually going. It's not pretty.
No, it's not.
Right? So the fact that we get these moments where it's realistic and earned rather than just, okay, here's a dramatic moment, let's have the girl cry, is good, like, to me, because I don't want to see something that feels too like it's too overused or that it's not realistic.
They were respectful of the characters and the audience.
Yes. And that's, I think, the overall take on the whole season is that it put forward a show that networks might have otherwise went, I think this is a little too intellectual. The same thing they said about Star Trek. This might be a little too cerebral. They're not going to get it. And assumed that, no, our audience is smart. They'll get it. They'll like it. And they did. I mean, I was a teenager watching this. And I was a teenager in the 90s watching this. Mm-hmm. This was, quote, old. And I'm being, but my peers would say that because I would try to get my friends to watch it and they'd be like, why are you watching that old 80s show? And I'm like, no, you don't get it. It's good. Like it's just, it was hard to explain and harder to sell it. But then I found the Steel Watchers, which were a Yahoo group at the time. And some of them are still there. And that community was established, which is why I really love this show, because this community too, the Facebook group, which started as a Yahoo group, has probably been the most active, like steadily active group I've ever been in. So, yeah.
So that is the end of season 1, I guess.
I think we've wrapped it up.
I want to say it's been fun being your co-host with this. And I'm looking forward to 3.5 more seasons.
Season 5. Oh.
Or is it 4.5 seasons?
Oh, season
3.5
5.
seasons. Yeah, season 5.
Yeah, 4.5 seasons.
3.5.
4.5.
3.5 more seasons because we've done one. We've got 3 more full ones, and then we've got the somewhat whacked off, cut off, shortened.
And I will say that I am super grateful that you took me on this roller coaster because I have never done a podcast. This is the first time, so I could have easily fallen flat on my face. So thanks for helping me look good.
Yeah. Hey, you've done a great job. I mean, I said it before when we were talking about Vintage Steel. I think some of the best episodes that we do are the ones where you're in charge. So anyway, what's next?
Oh, thank you.
We're gonna
next is season 2.
Steal Away With Me, a supersized episode. Yeah. So we've got.
I mean, really, it's just a James Bond episode.
That's I was watching. I was watching it the other day in preparation for taking my notes.
I'm surprised I didn't get sued.
And, the toward the end there, the music is almost a dead ripoff.
Yeah,
almost a dead.
I'm surprised they didn't get sued.
Well, they mixed in enough of the steel tone with it to kind of. Well, it's not exactly the same, and it's. But yeah, it was very, very close. So all right,
that'll be a fun one.
Is that it?
Well, thanks everyone for. I think that's it. Thanks. What should we direct people to links and stuff?
Yeah, or, we got stuff.
Yeah, we
got stuff.
Yeah, we've got our website, which has links to. Well, there's no movies mentioned in this one, but there's still the merch links and show notes. So check that out for those things, as well as the other stuff.
The links to the Facebook group for Steel Watchers Facebook group. Yep. That's the one that we discussed here about formerly being a Yahoo group till Yahoo shut it all down. We've got links to our Twitter. We've got links to our Instagram, and then links to our official Facebook page, which is Steel Watching. So, yeah, all that is there. Woo, woo, woo.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. And this has been season 1 of Steel Watching. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.